All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly pretty radical book that pitches an entirely new model for physics. It's asking us to question the very foundation of how we see the universe, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, reality isn't made of trillions of tiny parts, but is actually one single connected thing. Let's get into it. So, right off the bat, the author hits us with this huge question. We've got general relativity for the big stuff and quantum mechanics for the tiny stuff. But, they famously don't get along. What if the reason we can't unify them is because our whole approach is, well, built on a kind of shaky foundation? And this quote, man, it just nails the core idea. The book argues that we've completely mistaken the map for the territory. All our beautiful, complex equations are just that. They're descriptions. They're amazing tools we created to understand reality, but they aren't reality itself. Okay, so let's dig into this. To really get what's being proposed, we first have to see the problem the author is pointing out, what they see as this fundamental crack in how we perceive everything. So the whole issue, according to this book, boils down to something called the human perspective. It's our deep, instinctual need to divide the world up just so we can make sense of it. We have to separate the experiment from the thing being experimented on, the particle from the wave. We draw lines, we make distinctions. I mean, really think about it. Every single experiment you've ever heard of is based on this idea. We create a controlled little box, an apparatus, and we observe something else. We take this seamless fabric of reality and we cut it into pieces, creating objects and defining the relationships between them. That's science, right? And this is a perfect example. Things like Huygens' principle, or the rules we use to explain the double-slit experiment, they're all human frameworks. We're imposing an order on nature so that we can predict it. But what if, at its deepest level, nature isn't actually made of all these separate parts we're trying to measure? And here's the kicker. All that weirdness in quantum mechanics, entanglements, the observer effects, all of it, the book sees that as nature itself kind of protesting. It's nature pushing back against our attempts to slice and dice it. It's a massive clue that a reality made of separate, distinct objects might just be an illusion that we've created. So, if making distinctions is the problem, what's the solution? What happens if you try to build a model of the universe with no distinctions at all, a model based on just one thing? Well, say hello to C-space. This is the heart of the whole idea. The theory is that everything, space, time, matter, energy, the whole shebang, it's not a collection of separate things. It's all just part of a single, continuous, elastic fabric. C-space isn't in the universe. It is the universe. Now, to really get this, the author makes this brilliant distinction between machinery and mechanism. Think of it this way. A mechanism is a description, like a blueprint or a mathematical formula. It tells you the rules of how something works. But the machinery, that's the actual stuff. A car's engine is the machinery, the blueprint is just the mechanism. The argument is that modern physics has given us incredibly powerful mechanisms, but no actual machinery. C-space is proposed as the real machinery of reality. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of C-space. It's a single, continuous, elastic fabric. It's got the 3 dimensions of space we know and love, plus another one the author calls time interval, which is basically the engine for change itself. This isn't just some empty background stage. It's the complete machinery. And everything we think is fundamental, particles, forces, even space-time, they're just effects we perceive like ripples and folds in this one single thing. So if you buy into this, even for a second, you realize it completely flips our script on everything. It forces us to completely rethink the most basic building blocks of our universe. In the physics we all learned, reality is like a set of Legos, built from a whole zoo of different fundamental particles. But in C-space, there are no separate particles. What we call an electron or a quark is just a stable, localized vibration, like a persistent wrinkle in that one fabric. And forces like gravity, they're not fundamental either. They're basically just artifacts of our limited perspective, how we perceive the movement and geometry of that fabric. And this picture from the book, it's a cool way to try and imagine it. A particle isn't some little marble floating in space. It's this complex, self-sustaining pattern of resonance, a kind of carrier ball of wiggles and deformations inside the C-space fabric. It only looks like a separate object to us. Okay, this is all mind-bending stuff, for sure. But the big question is, does it actually do anything? Can it solve any real-world physics problems? Well, the author tackles that by applying the C-space model to a classic paradox. Let's walk through this thing called the photon paradox. You start with 3 identical photons. You decide one of them is your clock. Then you send that clock photon and another identical photon away from Earth's gravity. Now, thanks to relativity, the clock photon starts ticking faster. But here's the paradox. When that faster clock measures its identical twin, it sees the twin as having a lower frequency. It looks redshifted. How can 2 identical things suddenly be different? Well, the C-space solution says the paradox only exists because we made an artificial distinction. We called one a clock and the other the observed. In C-space, there's no distinction. They're just 2 identical patterns in the fabric, behaving in the exact same way relative to that fabric. The paradox just evaporates.
Now, it's super important to understand this isn't being presented as the final answer. It's not a finished, proven theory. Instead, it's framed as a call for a completely new direction for science.
And I really love this quote from the author because it's so honest about the goal here. This isn't about having all the answers right now. It's about proposing a new path, a new research program for physics to explore, one that's built on a totally different philosophical foundation. And what that new path looks like is this 2-layer model for science. Layer 1, the base layer, is C-space, the actual machinery of reality. Then, layer 2 is all of current physics, quantum mechanics, relativity, everything. It's our interpretation, our human perspective on that deeper machinery. In this view, quantum mechanics doesn't need an interpretation anymore. It is the interpretation. And if you follow this train of thought, whoa, the implications are just huge. The accepted age of the universe might be wrong. That mystery of dark matter could just be the effect of massive, slow-moving waves in the C-space fabric. Even the fundamental constants of nature might not be so constant after all. And it leads to this really profound, almost spiritual takeaway. If reality is one continuous whole, then so are we. The separation we feel between ourselves and the world, it's an illusion. And that's really where we'll leave it. This whole idea goes way beyond physics labs and blackboards. It touches on our very place in the cosmos. If the most fundamental truth of reality isn't separation, but connection, if we're all just patterns in one singular, magnificent fabric, how would that change us? It's a pretty big question to think about.